But I think the talking about the kinds of things that I want to talk about in 10 to 12 minutes is obviously very difficult. This is the reason why I asked the organizers to circulate 3 articles which actually elaborate the points I'm going to make much more. And I think the front pages of these 3 articles have been put outside. If anybody's not picked them up, please do. There's also, the ideas are also based on a book that a colleague and I did last year, extreme summary of which I have a few copies of. The book is also here if somebody wants to see it. Sorry, that's a bit of hard sell. I'd like to build on a little bit of what Mr. Ramaswamy Iyer and what Suman have just said. I guess we're all agreed that there is a need to fundamentally challenge the current models and paradigms of development. I'd just like to add here that while a lot of people have mentioned neoliberal and capitalist forms of development, I also think that we need to fundamentally challenge state-dominated forms of development, for instance, which was predominant in India prior to the 1990s and in many other so-called communist or socialist countries. And I'll come back to what I think is the third pillar that we should be looking at. There's been a number of very interesting ideas and experiences shared here since yesterday. And there's lots more. I've been going around India looking at dozens of initiatives on different kinds of sectors and themes. Agriculture, pastoralism, education, health, governance, social justice, media, arts. There's so much of alternative stuff that is happening just in India, and of course similar stuff all over the world, from which we can learn. And a lot of the ideas that I'm going to talk about today are actually just learning from these incredible initiatives, some of which have been mentioned here. There's just one that I'd like to say a little bit about, spend a minute on, which is a small village, small indigenous community village called Medhalekha in the heart of India, in the state of Maharashtra, which for over the last 25 years has worked on the principle of local self-governance. Their motto is a very simple one. We elect the government in Delhi and Mumbai, but in our village, we are the government. It's a very fundamental principle of direct democracy, which I'll speak about again in a minute. They have recently reclaimed, they've reversed 150 years of colonialism and reclaimed 2,000 hectares of forest. This is now titled to them as a community forest. And most incredibly, just 2 months back, they actually put all of their private agricultural land into the village commons. So actually there's no private lands in that village anymore. And there's much more that can be said about this village. I can send some references for those of you who are interested. Now, I think the question, one of the crucial questions that we have to ask ourselves in looking at all these different initiatives, many of which were mentioned here also, is how many of them, I think it's something that Lawrence and others have raised, how many of these are complementary to the current dominant models and therefore are susceptible to actually being co-opted. Waste to energy as an example that has come up here, large-scale solar energy is another example, where equity is not a concern at all, probably not even environment. Windmills are another one, etc., which are all parts of what is now increasingly emerging as the green economy model, which I think really we really fundamentally need to question. Because I think it's an attempt by the dominant economy, the dominant polity and economy, to continue itself, rather than, of course, face the collapse that it otherwise is facing. There was a very interesting article I read on something called perverse resilience. Current dominant models are actually perversely resilient by reinventing them through the green economy model or the green capitalism model or whatever. And at least everything I've seen so far on the green economy model, such as for instance was coming out of the United Nations Environment Programme, does not actually talk about fundamental transformations, economic, political, cultural transformations that we need. And so I think we have to be really careful about it. So which ones of these initiatives and which ones of the ideas are really truly transformative? I would like to say that I think there are 4 or 5 pillars on which we can actually examine this. The first one is the initiative or the effort we're looking at, is it truly ecologically sustainable? Is it actually recognizing the ecological limits that the earth or a particular region places on us? Does it recognize the need for ecologies to continue to be resilient for the connectivity of ecosystems and landscapes and seascapes, etc.? And clearly here, and this comes, I'll come back to this in a minute, this comes to the point of which Suman raised about growth, and I'll come back to that. So the first is ecological sensitivity, sustainability, limits, resilience. The second is the initiative leading towards direct democracy, which is to say where people, ordinary people, are in control of the decisions that are going to affect their lives, not leaving those decisions to elected representatives. But of course, everything cannot happen in direct democracy. In larger scales, you need to have systems of representative, or what maybe some of the Latin American countries are beginning to call delegated democracy. But it's coming from the bottom. The direction is actually being led from those small scale urban or rural units, and then of course building to larger scales. So direct democracy. Third pillar, economic democracy. How much are we actually tending towards producers and consumers being in control of the economy, rather than letting somebody else, whether in the state or as a private corporation, be in control? How much are we actually transforming the centralized monetized economy into forms of exchange which are either non-monetary or local currencies and so on and so forth? Again, there are hundreds of experiments on this around the world. And of course, there's a lot of traditional barter system, which was exploitative in some senses, but could be reimagined in the current context. And how much of the economies are actually localized, at least in terms of the basic basic needs that people have, rather than having to depend on outside forces. Fourth pillar, social justice and cultural diversity. So clearly, of course, both the kind of traditional inequalities that we have in a country like India and the new modern inequalities coming up have to be dealt with through initiatives on social justice. And the fifth, which in some senses actually cuts across, but because it's been a crucial theme here, technological and knowledge democracy. How much are the innovations in the developments in technology, the assessments of technology, actually in democratic space, and how much is knowledge in the democratic space? Already again, Suman and others have spoken about the knowledge commons as a crucial component of this. So I would say that these 5 pillars, 4 or 5 pillars, are absolutely crucial in looking at the alternative paradigms. Which means we have to challenge the growth paradigm. We've talked a lot about scaling up here, but at least in this particular case, we have to talk about scaling down. At least as far as the globe is concerned. We've already crossed 3 of the 8 planetary limits. In India, we are already twice over our ecological, our biocapacity, according to a report from a few years back. So clearly we have to talk about scaling down, within which, of course, the poor still need to have forms of, I don't know whether to call it growth or development or whatever, but of course they need more space. But as a community as a whole, as a society as a whole, and humanity as a whole, we certainly have to go away from the growth paradigm and actually start constructing and building on alternative paradigms of well-being. I don't even call it development, it's a seriously problematic word. But paradigms of well-being in Latin America, I talk about buen vivir, degrowth in Europe, ecological swaraj in India. I mean, there are many different ideas and practices that are actually coming up on how you build a different model, or build models of well-being. Secondly, as I said earlier, challenging both state domination and the domination of private corporate capital, and therefore positing the community and the collective as a third and prioritized pole. I recognize completely that the community is a highly contested word. There are internal issues of inequality, exploitation, etc., etc., etc. But I think those are things that also many of these initiatives are beginning to actually challenge and be able to deal with. But I really don't think we can get away from looking at the collective of human beings at a local scale and a larger scale as being the alternative both to the state and to private corporations. Fourth point here, which is about challenging consumerism. Again, this has been spoken about, someone mentioned it earlier, so I won't go into detail. One of the articles circulated here is about the idea that I put forward, saying that we need a sustainable consumption line. We have in India a poverty line, and nobody is supposed to be below the poverty line. Of course, it's become a bit of a joke, just setting those lines. But similarly, we need a sustainable consumption line, and nobody should be above that sustainable consumption line because it then eats into the space of the poor to be able to move up. How do you construct a sustainable consumption line? It's of course very difficult, but there are things you can begin with. Water as an example, where we can actually begin with looking at what is a sustainable water per capita, per family, or per community kind of thing. There are many others. And eventually, of course, this needs to be a social process. You can't simply have a law which says this is the sustainable consumption and nobody should go above it. It needs to be a social process. And we need to start with that with ourselves. And just to mention a very small example here, I was a bit surprised and shocked, and I hope it doesn't happen again, that JNU gives us water in Bisleri bottles. It's really not easy. Certainly, an institution like this could provide us clean drinking water without having to make Bisleri that much richer and create the waste that this will create. So it has to start with us, of course. Now, putting all of this together, and I'll spend another 2 or 3 minutes. Is that okay, Dinesh? Yeah?
Yes, certainly.
I'm using
I'll
your.
be partial to you.
No, I'm using your precedence because you
Yeah,
you are very good at actually taking those extra few minutes.
I did use and I allow you.
So, putting all of this together, my colleague and I actually come up with this. It's a name, so don't worry about names. So basically, the idea of a radical ecological democracy, which is to say a form of direct radical democracy in which all of us are participating in decision making, which is ecologically and socially sensitive. A very simple concept, but it builds in all of these different ideas that I've just mentioned. What I think is most crucial in something like a radical ecological democracy framework is not so much the replication or the scaling up of the individual initiatives that we've spoken about, but it's really about what are the principles that are emerging from these initiatives. Just to mention a few that we've put out, and this is just a small sample. Local self-sufficiency for basic needs. And by basic needs, I don't only mean water and food and so on, but also things like learning and health. Bioregional approaches. So we actually start looking at decision making and planning not at the level only of political units, but at the level of ecological contiguous regions. Yeah? The Western Ghats in India, for instance, as an example, or the Gangetic Plains as an example. And here, of course, then we need to cut across countries. Countries are, in that sense, historical accidents. Nation states are historical accidents. The Sundarbans as an ecosystem is not a historical accident. We need to sort of conceive of, or Deepak was talking about, the entire Himalayan belt, so Nepal, India, etc., etc. That's the second. Third, building on local self-sufficiency and localization, of course, greater relationships across landscapes and seascapes and across to the whole globe, which are based on the exchange of cultures and ideas, not so much the exchange of finance. Today's globalization is about finance, the free flow of finance. It needs to be a globalization of exchange of cultures and ideas and people and materials and so on. Fourth, the notion of enoughness. What is enough for a person? Not the notion of more and more and more and more and more and more, which is what our advertisers, of course, keep telling us is. The Reliance has this incredible ad called the Empire of Happiness. And the Empire of Happiness, of course, is about having a 50-inch television. Bought from Reliance, of course, not from any other company. Building in, difficult, but building in notions of enoughness. The rights of nature, we keep talking about each other's human rights, but also, of course, being able to project that into the rights of nature, and the rest of nature. The dignity of labor. It's incredible today that those of us who write about labor issues or environmental issues or peasants issues or forest dwellers issues get more money than those who are doing the labor. It's this stuff here has much more value than hands, and I think the dignity of labor is another one. Diversity, already mentioned, but the diversity of ecologies, qualities, cultures, knowledge systems, economies, ideologies, etc. The notion of working in the commons and cooperatives rather than as individuals, etc. There are many others, but I think it's really being able to put together these sorts of principles and values that is important. Let me end with just a few, I think, key questions that are challenges for at least for us. In this kind of a radical ecological democratic framework, what is the role of the state? Is there a role? If so, what is that role? What is the character of the state? how do we change the character of the state in such a way that it is actually responsive to these sorts of notions of community, etc., etc. I think some of the Latin American experiments are very interesting to look at. They're not necessarily huge successes, but there's a lot of interesting things coming out of that. Second, what is the role of the private sector? Is there one? And if so, what is that role? Third, what is the role of middle classes? So we talked about communities who are disempowered, having to be mobilized, etc., etc. But many of us are from middle classes. What is our role? Fourth, what are the kind of structures we think of for local to global governance? At the local direct democracy but delegated upwards, how will that work? How do you make sure that those who are delegated that don't actually become power in themselves? Fifth, who would be the political carriers of this transformation? Is it people's movements? Is it NGOs? Is it workers' associations, unions? Is it political parties? Clearly it's not the current governments and the corporations, but who else are the political carriers of this transformation? And finally, a very specific thing, can we in some way use the post-2015 process of redesigning the Millennium Development Goals? Currently they're talking about Sustainable Development Goals, which are unfortunately mostly going in the green economy kind of direction. Can we actually put pressure, build civil society influence on that post-2015 process to insert some of these ideas? Let me just offer two concrete things which we are doing, which we hope you could all participate in. One is starting this year, we're going to be doing a series of what we call alternatives confluences, which will be trying to bring people in India, to get people who are doing these sorts of different initiatives, etc., together on a common platform, also to be able to cut across sectors. Because the sustainable farming folks do meet together, the justice people do, the human rights people, they all meet together, but they don't necessarily talk across these sectors. So that's one idea. And the second is next week we are launching a website on alternatives in India. We're looking for stories, many of which have come up here, to be able to put onto that website. So please, and this is responding also to, I think Lawrence's very plaintive plea to look at positives and not just all the negative stuff that's happening. So look out for a website called alternativesindia.com. In Hindi it's going to be called vikalpsangam.com. Thank you.